So when you're a person who talks about data, oh, thank you, Larry. When you're a person who talks about data after people have eaten, you're like, oh my God. But I hope that you'll see why we are truly at an exciting time as it relates to fraternity. There is so much to be proud about, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to just throw papers sometimes to the side because I want to make sure that I cover all the points. So first, oh, that's right, I've got the clicker. There we go. So what I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about the demographic cliff in higher education and men and women on campuses. So I want to start off by talking about higher education trends because I want you to have sort of a sense of context in terms of where are fraternities today as it relates to higher ed. I spoke with your board, I guess was it back in the fall, and did a much lengthier presentation on higher ed trends. Don't worry, we're not going to do all of that today. I am going to allude to some of the major points. And if you want to talk more about that, I'm happy to. But I do want to talk about the demographic cliff and where men and women are on campuses today because it has a pretty significant impact in terms of where your role is as current student leaders. Then I'm going to talk about fraternal research specifically, and then what this all means for you and for fraternity. So, demographics and demand. There's a guy named Nathan Graw, who's at Carleton College in Minnesota, an economist, who wrote a book called Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education. And in that, he's looking at where students are 20 years down the line, right? And how do you know that? You know that by are babies born, and what does that mean? And so when we look at babies born 20 years ago, so approximately when they would be coming to college, we know that there is a dip in terms of those students who will be coming to college. Now, you may say to yourself, wait, I thought we were having more and more people than ever before. It's based on something called, and you can see it there, the Higher Education Demand Index, and it looks at not just who's coming to college, but also likelihood to attend college. And then there are additional pressures facing college, which we'll talk about. But this is the graph that I want you to see, and it's just taken right from that book. I don't have a fancy graph of that. But if you can see that line, and this was written just prior to the pandemic, that's the dip. That's the dip that higher education is now facing in terms of students going to college over the next 20 years. Now, that's also coming, figure out a place to put this water, that's also coming at a time when higher education is more expensive than it's ever been. The growth of expense of higher education way outpaces the growth of healthcare. And still, we know that there's this declining demand. So remember that graph. If you remember nothing else, that's the graph that I want you to remember. And then COVID hit. And what was looking like 2025, 2026 started as fall 2022, 1 million fewer students returned to campuses than were expected. So the decline that had been anticipated has already begun for higher education. Men and women, oh, there we go. Oh, yeah, this is a great example. Birmingham Southern. Anybody from Alabama? Alabama people usually are like, yeah. Anyway, so Birmingham Southern College is an example of a campus that's already feeling the hit. Now, the Southeast is considered a growth area for higher education, and Birmingham Southern is what I would have, if you had asked me about Birmingham Southern, I said, oh my gosh, it's a great little school because it's a small private liberal arts college. It just announced that it is seeking $30 million before it will enroll the new freshman class. And you can see that quote, that the infusion will cover projected deficits of the campus. They're not just fundraising, they're just trying to cover their balance sheet. So we're dealing with a significantly serious time as it relates to the future of higher education. And we're going to see more and more of this. So now we'll talk about men and women attending college. So up until 1975, men were attending college at a higher rate. By 1986, whoops, I went too soon. I don't want you to see that yet. By 1986, men and women were nearly equal in college. By 2018, you can see those percentages of women attending college versus men. That estimates to about 2.1 million fewer men on campus. There you can see it visually to get an idea of where men were on campuses versus where they are today. So fewer and fewer men. Along with that is student support. And you know, I don't want to at all begrudge programs like an African American Student Success Program or Hispanic programs for Latino students. These are all great programs. What we don't see are men's support programs. Really what we're dealing with is a situation where fraternities and college athletics to some degree are where you would see that. However, and we know this again and again and again, that men on today's college campus often feel lost. This is a Wall Street Journal cover article. Men don't have a place that feels their own on college campuses. Men often do not feel like they have a place to turn to beyond fraternity. And that's one of the many reasons why fraternity is so important. So some things we know in higher education. We know that enrollment in four-year higher education is declining, and it is going to continue to decline rapidly. We know that COVID-19 has sped up the decline. We know that those percentages are exacerbated for men. We know that programs that support men are close to non-existent on campuses. We know that the perceived value of a college degree continues to decline. And these are some of the things that we can talk about in trends if you want to talk about them, but I'm not going to go into as much detail. We know that for-profit and certificate programs continue to gain traction in place of higher education. We know that the international student rate continues to decline. We know that mental health issues continue to increase and garner attention in higher education. And we know that what's being referenced as the Great Disillusionment is affecting staffing on college campuses. Again, the importance fraternity can play in the life. So, what is it called? So there are math people in the audience. What's it called when there's like an if-then statement? It's like a conditional, anyway. So, if fraternities offer something of value to higher education, then colleges and universities need fraternity. And I want you to think about that, right? So if we know fraternities offer something of value, not just, hey, fraternities are great, hey, they give more back. If we know fraternities offer something of value, then while we know colleges and universities are going into a time of true crisis, we know that colleges and universities need fraternity. And that's why there's a research agenda, right? Now, prior to the NIC research agenda, 1% of higher education research had been related to fraternities and sororities. Most of that focusing on alcohol, hazing, and sexual misconduct. What was being promoted were those things that were negatives about fraternity, and I would argue negative about college student life, but often painted as negative about fraternity. What was working in fraternity had not been promoted. And so the NIC research agenda started to balance that equation so that the what was working was getting as much attention as those things that are problematic within colleges and universities. So an effort to balance the equation. And the NIC Research Committee was born. And Brad is one of those who serves on that research committee. My role and Judd talked about the NIC Research Initiative last night. My role is as advisor to the NIC Research Committee, trying to figure out what is it that we need to study, how does that link to litigation, how does it link to strategy for national organizations, what is it that people who are in higher education need to hear. There are many, many, many administrators, and I promise you this is the case, who want to support the fraternity, and they need talking points. They need to be able to say, no, we don't want to do X, Y, or Z because this is what fraternities do for us. But if the only answer is, well, they give back a lot of money after they graduate, we need more than that. We need to know the truth about what fraternity does. So I said that there were some things that we're talking about fraternity, mostly about alcohol, sexual violence, things like that. There were other longitudinal findings, and when I say longitudinal findings, I know some of you are like, yeah, I know what that is. If you don't, what that means, longitudinal just means this is what we were saying 20 years ago versus what we're saying now. So longitudinally, we had a study by DeBard and Sachs, found that fraternity men, you can see 2011, fraternity men carried more credit hours, had higher GPAs, and they were rejecting the notion that first-year students attain lower GPAs. So that had been their hypothesis, and they found, no, that's not actually true. So that's one of the older studies prior to the NIC research agenda. And then I'm going to put up these 3 studies, all 3. One you can see in 2002, reporting higher communication and critical thinking abilities, increase in community engagement. And one of the things that we know over and over and over again in literature related to college students in general is if they are engaged academically and socially on campus, those are key components to retention and graduation. And they found, you can see 2015, so not as long ago, found that fraternity members are more likely to be engaged. So these are all really, really good findings for higher ed if they're promoted. And you're going to hear me talk about, this guy is named Gary Pike out of Indiana University. You're going to hear me, so not Pike Fraternity, this is Gary Pike. You're going to hear me talk about Gary Pike a couple of times. So Gary Pike did a number of studies in the late 90s and early 2000s and continually found that for first-year students, that there was a significance between fraternity and perceptions of a supportive learning environment. So they felt, again, that's that concept of engagement linked to retention and graduation. And that with seniors, not only feeling a supportive learning environment, but also that they were more likely to be involved in collaborative learning and have interaction with faculty members. Great data, right? All right, so now, make that come up. I want to look at a study. It was called, there was a guy named Corprew. Let me put it all up there. There we go. Corprew is a faculty member at Loyola. He was a faculty member at Loyola in New Orleans, and he hypothesized that essentially that fraternity men would demonstrate greater degrees of hypermasculinity. And his hypothesis was not supported. And in fact, he was the one, is that the next screen? I think so. Nope, that's not the next screen. In one of his articles, Corprew said, we need to be doing more fraternity-style education because clearly something's working really well in fraternity that's not for other students. And then there's this Yates. This was a small school. Yates is a math faculty member at a small school in New Mexico. And his president at some point must have heard somewhere, yeah, well, fraternities may or may not be linked to good outcomes. And so she asked this math professor to study this. And he found that the addition of a fraternity and sorority community can have a positive overall influence on both student and institutional success. So these were all findings not related to any kind of emphasis that the NIC wanted to explore. These were all just a couple of studies that were out there, and now there's the opportunity for the NIC and other researchers, but the NIC primarily, to focus on how can we make sure we're looking at all of the assets that fraternities bring. So, this actually, and I know Brad probably loves seeing this on screen. This was one of our first studies, and it was Brad Beecham who said, we need to talk about the benefits of the single-sex experience specifically. And according to already published research, now this is all in a much larger paper, we know that fraternities have positive academic outcomes. We've talked about that. Greater campus involvement, greater sense of belonging, and all of those lead to retention and graduation. We knew that part. And that they enhance student leadership, right? That's the sort of that beginning point. Additional findings that came in this study, and these came through many focus groups, is that fraternities provide a place. This is no surprise, right? But getting it in print matters when you're making arguments. That there are opportunities for men to talk to men, and that these conversations are otherwise perhaps not happening, right? So that benefit of what we know to be the modern day fraternity. Additionally, found that the strong satisfaction with the overall student experience, opportunities for leadership, agreement on respect for individual differences was greater in fraternity than for those not affiliated with fraternity. Comfort in having those difficult discussions, we talked about that. Support for spiritual practices and health. And last, a willingness to reach out to chapter members on mental health and wellness before reaching out to family, peers, and other professionals. So huge in terms of when we talk about mental health on college campuses, that's a finding that we know is an asset for fraternities. And then went a step further for an additional study on mental health specifically. And now you're going to see some numbers. Give me hands up if you've taken some stats classes. Awesome. So when I say significance, so it's really important for those of you who haven't taken stats. Here's kind of stats 101. They're surveying, and it may be that more people said this than this, right? But when you're dealing with really big sample sets, there might not be significance with more people saying this over this, right? X over Y. Now we're talking about significance. At what level are these findings significant? And we found that fraternity men are more likely to have higher psychological well-being than those not affiliated with fraternity. Lower depression scores among fraternity members than those who are not unaffiliated, than those who are unaffiliated, and higher agreement about for strong campus support systems. So more likely to think positively about campus support systems when necessary. These are really important findings for higher education. When higher education says, no, this is a negative, no, this is not a negative. This is a positive in an area where higher education's been struggling. Now, I'm not going to read all these to you, but I did try to put in bold face some of the quotes that came directly out of the focus groups related to fraternity. But you can see, and this is coming from those individuals who were interviewed about this topic specifically, benefit after benefit after benefit, so that when reporting out, whether it is in PR or in litigation, these are things that we know about higher education and fraternity. So now I'm going to talk about COVID, my favorite thing to ever talk about. So, during COVID, I think I already read you that quote by a faculty member saying, students aren't engaged. Well, so the NIC said, what's happening in fraternity during COVID? My daughter was in college during COVID. She just graduated in May. And so I saw what was happening for her during when I guess she was home for about a semester and a half. And one of the first things that I know that she did, she was at that point, I don't remember what the title was, but she was essentially social chair. And they were about to have their formal, which they couldn't have, right? They all got sent home in March. And she decided to organize sort of a Zoom formal with just her sorority sisters. But it gave them a chance they all put on their dresses that they already had. And I'm trying to remember, I'm looking at Larry thinking, was she 21? Because I did give her some wine. I was wondering, is she 21 yet? Yeah, let's just say she was. But she went up in her room, and a litigation person can never say that, so that can never be quoted. But she and her sorority sisters were in their room. They had a playlist, and they just talked, right? That was really important at a time when they were all disconnected, and you all would have felt that. So we studied what's going on with fraternity men during COVID. I'm going to show you. Higher level of satisfaction with the fraternity engagement, 97% saying they felt connected to their fraternities, 91% satisfied with their overall experience, 95% feeling that they were still a part of the fraternal community. That's huge at a time when everybody felt disengaged. So I'm going to look specifically at some data related to this academically, because here's where the comparisons are with how they were feeling within their fraternity versus within how they were feeling compared to their overall college experience. 92% of fraternity members saying they still felt supported versus 74% feeling supported by their college or university. And here are some quotes related to that. Now that if we have the significance on this, but you can see it, right? You know, when we're talking almost 20 percentage point difference in terms of that feeling of connectedness academically, very significant. Social support, 94% of fraternity members feeling that they were still socially supported versus 49% feeling that they were supported by their institutions. And I got a lot of quotes, I'll just put them all up there, related to social support. And professional support. Again, a time when a lot of students were like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? The whole world is flipped over. 90% of fraternity members feeling supported versus 69% of those not affiliated with fraternities thinking about what's next for me professionally. And then health and wellness, 92% of fraternity members feeling supported in their overall health and wellness, 64% feeling supported by their institutions related to health and wellness. So that faculty member who, in the Chronicle of Higher Education, was bemoaning the fact that colleges don't seem engaged, or that college students aren't seeming engaged, I do wonder what it would be like if he talked to fraternity men versus those not affiliated and how those conversations would differ, because the data certainly speak in favor. So now, let's look at Gallup. Gallup, you likely know, national organization that does polling. I'm going to talk about the background. A guy named Brandon Bastide. He's now with Kaplan Global. He's like the vice president for something very important with Kaplan. Brandon is an Alpha Tau Omega. And in the early, I guess just like right around 2010, 2011, he was working for Gallup, and he was approached by Mitch Daniels, who was then at Purdue, and said, you know what, I want to know what's going on in terms of life outcomes in general for Purdue graduates, but then others as well. And again, I mentioned Mitch Daniels, a great president. And so Brandon's like, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And why don't we look at some other aspects as we're developing out this polling? Let's also look at fraternities and sororities and life outcomes related to those who joined fraternities and sororities while in school. So the data I'm now going to share, this has now happened in 2014 and again in 2021. How are the outcomes for those who participated in fraternities and sororities versus those who did not? So, Greek alumni exhibit higher emotional attachment to their alma mater, are more likely, sorry, let me go back. There we go. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Okay, 30 years, engagement, 12, okay, yeah. Okay, let me do these 5 areas of well-being. So these are the 5 areas of well-being that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there we go. These are the 5 areas of well-being that Gallup considers when it's doing its polling. So now, here we go. Greek alumni, higher emotional attachment to their alma mater, more likely to recommend their college to others, and more likely to give back in time and treasure. And for those of you who are not attending Harvard, the differences between fraternity and sorority members and all other college graduates are statistically significant in favor of fraternity and sorority. Oh, and this is controlling for key demographics. And this is the part, where graduates went to college, public or private, small or large, selective or not selective, hardly matters at all to their current well-being and their work lives in comparison to their experiences in college. In other words, it matters very little where you go to college. It does matter whether or not you are in a fraternity or sorority. Awesome. Okay, another study, this one. So I talked to you about Gary Pike. So another part of the NIC research agenda, the NIC went back to Gary Pike and said, we want to look at some of those same things that you looked at in the late 90s and early 2000s, and are those same things still true? And what did he find? Yes. Fraternity members are significantly more engaged in their campus communities than non-members, report greater gains in overall learning, and were more satisfied with their college experiences. So what was true 20 years ago, true today. And he looked at one additional piece, often a critique of fraternities and sororities, and Judd alluded to this last night. This is coming directly from that paper. Despite being less diverse than students in general, fraternity and sorority members report higher levels of interaction with people different from themselves than other students. Again, a critique of fraternity and sorority that doesn't bear out in the data. And I think this is the last of the reports I'm going to talk about. And you're getting a preview. So I shared with you that Brad Beecham's on the research committee. This is brand new, though. And so we're actually not even reviewing this research within the research committee until our meeting next week. But it's on peer accountability. Now, in higher education, it's often called bystander intervention. You know, are people willing to intervene when they see something going wrong? And what did we find? Again, fraternity members versus those not affiliated had statistically higher comfort levels in providing accountability, peer accountability, related to academics, sexual relationships, professional career, personal goals, and hazing. And now I want to look at the percentage. So when you see PPT, that's percentage point difference in terms of holding peers accountable. So related to academics, 19 percentage points. Intervening during hazing, 17 percentage points. Now, for those of us who work on the litigation front, this is massive, massive. Intervening when a friend was using or misusing alcohol or other drugs, a 13 percentage point difference. Notice that these are all double-digit percentage point differences. This is huge. Intervening when a friend is violating campus policy. That one actually kind of surprised me. Providing accountability related to a friend's use of alcohol or other substances. Providing accountability to a friend related to professional goals. Intervening when a friend is engaging in an unsafe manner. Now, you show that to a campus administrator. Why in the world wouldn't we want to have fraternity on every single college campus? Because we now have a significant data set to share related to peer accountability. So key takeaways. Fraternity members tend to be happier, are more involved, and have better overall educational experiences. Fraternity members are more likely to be retained and graduate. Alumni of the fraternal experience have increased life satisfaction. Alumni are more connected to their alma maters. Fraternity and sorority members have better overall mental health. Fraternity members are more likely to turn to a brother in a time of crisis. Fraternity members are more likely to practice peer intervention. It's awesome. I mean, it is truly, truly awesome. And this isn't, you know, it's important to think about, and this was, and David alluded to this at the introduction. This is independent research. This isn't, I mean, the NIC research committee is working on this, but we're hiring external researchers to test these things and then putting this information into what are called peer-reviewed journals. So this isn't the NIC Trade Association saying this. These are independent researchers who are saying this is what's true about fraternity. And so there's so much to be proud of. I think Judd gave these points last night. 3 times more likely to obtain an internship, 2 times as likely to encourage others to attend their alma mater, 5 times as likely to give back financially to their alma mater, almost 5 times as likely to be satisfied with their life, and importantly, All of this has been controlled for key demographic variables, including socioeconomic and racial differences, often another critique. That's the true story about what's happening in fraternity. That's the true story about what fraternity alumni are doing, what fraternity staffs are doing, and what you all are doing every day on your college campuses. And we've got to make sure that the word is out. You know, the NIC is going to put together PR kits. The Sigma Nu is going to use those PR kits. The NIC is going to be sending this information out to university presidents and vice presidents. We're getting this stuff into university journals, peer-reviewed journals. And we've got to make sure that this is shared on every single college campus. So that I don't have to talk for a few minutes, I want you to, like, I guess everybody's in groups of 2, go to a table, put together a group of 4. I want you to spend, 5-7 minutes talking about how you could promote this on your campus. So, go. So, good ideas? Who had good ideas? Okay, now I'm going to ask for volunteers. So, this is where you get to feel confident. I want a group to raise its hand and say, we want to tell you our ideas. Who's going to do it first? I can't see. Who said that? Awesome. Come on up. Oh, yeah, no, you're coming on up. Okay, and well, before you go, you're going to say who you're working with, the other schools too. So, make sure you know. You know who you're working with? Okay. All right, come on up. So you're going to introduce yourself, you're going to talk about your team, and you're going to talk about how to use this. Good? This mic will work, right? Or am I screwing you up? Look at him. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't tell him I was going to do this. He's like, what is she doing? Wait, no, he's bringing you a mic. This is, yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Okay, so is it working?
Yep, you're on.
Sweet. Okay, so my name's Sage. I'm from the Sigma Nu at Missouri State. In our group was Butler. We have University of Tulsa, and then University of Illinois. What we talked about was bringing this to like campus's IFC. I was the director of marketing for like Missouri State's IFC, and I listened to the Gavel episode where they talked about your findings.
Oh, good.
And so I used some of that information in like the promotional materials for like our recruitment with like our orientation sessions with new like incoming freshmen. So that's a good way to get that information out to incoming students, but then it's also good information to give to like parents of potential new members who are maybe like hesitant on if fraternities are a good idea or not. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So if you have an IFC that wants to share this with IFC, you fly me there, I'll be there. You Zoom me in, I'll do it. Again, I don't charge as a speaker. This is stuff that we just all need to know. So if you want to do that, you say the word, I'll be there. I'm not going to do it just for your chapter. You've got to get the whole IFC together. Okay, next group. Who's going to volunteer? Who said here? I can't see you, but you're very brave. Come on up. I still can't see who it was. Awesome, thank you. He's confirming his team. That's good. I like the tie. There you go.
Thank you. I'm Charlie Moss. I'm from the University of Lynchburg, and I was speaking with Greg from Mercer. In terms of spreading this information across your campus, as well as going to IFC or your Greek life administrator, if your campus has permits or ways that you can post flyers or posters, or if your campus has its own social media accounts or your chapter itself has social media accounts, make like a poster or something and just post it on campus, put it on your social medias.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Charlie. Awesome. Okay, one more. One more. Right where? Good. Awesome. There, I see you now. Awesome. Come on up. You ever spoken to a group of 250 people?
Not this big.
There you go. There you go.
My name is Derek Vernado. I'm with the Muro chapter of Northwestern State of Louisiana, and I was speaking with the guys at Georgia Southern along with our lieutenant. Also, we thought it would be a great idea to bring this to the IFC, but in a way of bringing it to a panel, such as bringing presidents from each chapter, such as Alpha Tau Omega, Kappa Alpha Order, Kappa Sigma, those kind of guys, to sit up on a panel like such and answer the questions that parents or students or potential new members would want to hear, and then also during recruitment and things like that, such as hybrid or formal recruitment processes, you want to put that information into pamphlets or websites or anything that you can give out so people would get these kind of answers and statistics, so that people will have a better opportunity and grasp on what fraternity life is and why that we do it and we participate in it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I can remember when I was still on campus, and I met regularly with the chair of the IFC, the student body president, those folks, and I would say you have got to market on the good, because I knew the battles that I was fighting behind the scenes, and it's not hard. You just have to be committed to do it. It is so incredibly important because the data do overwhelmingly support the experience. The more you can actively advocate, the better everybody's lives are going to be. And it's right. It's just what's true. And to hear things that aren't true again and again, it is frustrating and it hurts all of us. So whatever you can do to demonstrate that fraternity matters, I hope that this helps. Thanks so much.